If you want to understand the history of Southern Europe, you have to, like, completely stop looking at it like a quiet, well-lit museum exhibit behind glass. You know, the kind of exhibit I mean, right?
Oh, yeah, the hushed hallway.
Exactly. You walk down this hushed hallway, you look at the Roman room, and everything is perfectly categorized, perfectly preserved, and it's completely separate from the medieval Rhine next door.
Right, like they have nothing to do with each other.
Yeah. But looking at Southern Europe through the specific lens of our sources today, that museum display completely shatters. I mean, we aren't looking at a quiet display case at all. We are walking into an active, chaotic, just deafeningly loud foundry.
A foundry. I like that.
Right. Sparks are flying, ancient metals are melting down, and completely new, highly resilient alloys are being forged under immense heat and pressure. It's intense.
That foundry image, it perfectly captures the physical and cultural reality of the region. I mean, it is at its core a place of disciplined chaos. It's a place where nothing is ever truly erased, you know? It's only melted down and combined with whatever new material gets thrown into the crucible.
And that brings me directly to you, our listener. Welcome to this deep dive. Because today's journey through this historical foundry was triggered by, well, this incredible stack of sources and personal reflections that you uploaded for us.
Really amazing notes, by the way.
Seriously amazing. Specifically, you shared notes on a subpersonality, a mental framework or mindset that you operate under, which you refer to as VAL. And you want to understand Southern Europe, but not as some dry, trivia-filled list of dates and battles.
Right. Nobody wants just a list of dates.
Exactly. You want to view it through the VAL lens, a lens of immense pride, of relentless struggle, harsh discipline, and constant necessary reinvention. You were looking for the historical blueprint of the relentless climber.
So to map that blueprint properly, we first have to, define the physical boundaries of the foundry itself. Because when we say Southern Europe in the context of this deep dive, we are drawing our borders using the United Nations geoscheme.
Okay, so what does that actually cover?
Well, it's not just the vaguely warm part of the continent. We are talking about the Iberian Peninsula, meaning Spain and Portugal. We are looking at the entire Italian peninsula. We are looking at Greece.
That's a lot of ground.
It is. And we're also looking at the complex geopolitical tapestry of the Balkans. Croatia, Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro, North Macedonia, Serbia, and Slovenia. And crucially, we must include the islands and microstates that dot the Mediterranean, places like Malta, Andorra, San Marino, and the Holy See.
Wow, okay, so it's an absolutely massive, incredibly diverse expanse of land, water, and competing cultures.
It really is. And to keep from getting lost in all those different national borders, the sources provide us with a unified architectural framework for our discussion. We're going to look at this entire area as the Mediterranean hinge.
The Mediterranean hinge. I love that phrasing.
Right, because it is the precise geographical point where the sea, the mountain, the encroaching empire, and the isolated local village constantly interact. I mean, it is the hinge upon which three continents, Europe, Africa, and Asia, just swing and collide.
So to our listener, this deep dive is going to climb in layers, much like your VAL mindset would approach a sheer rock face. We're going to start at the bare geographical bedrock, work our way up through deep human prehistory, ascend into the mechanisms of ancient and medieval empires.
It's quite a climb.
It really is. And then decode the modern cultural maps, and finally, we will reach the summit by directly applying all of this historical weight to your relentless climber mindset.
Well, the foundational layer of any civilization is the rock it's built on, right? And the environmental logic of Southern Europe is brutal. I mean, it is brutal and specific. You have hot, severely dry summers, followed by milder, wetter winters.
But the defining physical feature that dictates human life here isn't the temperature, is it?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
It is the rugged, unforgiving uplands.
The mountains. And we need to be incredibly clear about the sheer scale and consequence of these geological walls. I mean, we were talking about the Pyrenees, which effectively wall off Iberia from the rest of Europe.
Right, a massive barrier.
Yeah, and the Alps, which cap Italy. The Apennines, which run directly down the spine of the Italian peninsula like a jagged backbone.
Yeah.
The Dinaric Alps, the Pindus Mountains in Greece, the massive tangled Balkan ranges.
And these mountains act as absolute historical barriers. They repeatedly and permanently fractured this massive region into much smaller, highly isolated ecological zones. I mean, if you live in a valley in the Apennines and there is a village in the next valley over,
You might as well be on different planets.
Exactly. For most of human history, that was the case. That environmental reality forced human settlement to follow very specific, highly condensed patterns.
Right, because you can't just build a sprawling, flat inland empire the way you might on the Eurasian steppe or the American Midwest. The geography physically rejects that. You can't, like, farm a 45-degree rocky slope with a massive plow.
You really can't. So people clustered. They built their lives in narrow river valleys, on tiny coastal plains, and on highly defensible hilltops. And that clustering completely dictated their agricultural survival.
Which brings us to the Mediterranean triad.
Yes. Grain, olives, and grapes.
I see this triad mentioned everywhere in the sources, but I want to dig into the mechanics of it. Why these three specific plants? Like, why did this become the absolute bedrock of Southern European survival?
Because it is an incredibly brilliant, ecologically staggered system designed to beat the geography. Let's break it down. Grain wheat, or barley, provides your massive caloric base, right?
Right.
But the Mediterranean summer is a drought. So you plant the grain in the autumn, let it grow during the wet winter, and harvest it in late spring or early summer before the heat bakes the soil into concrete.
Okay, so your calories are completely secured by June.
Exactly. Then you have grapes. Grapevines have these deep, aggressive taproots that can reach subterranean water sources that other plants just can't, allowing them to survive the blistering, rainless summer. You harvest the grapes in the early autumn.
Wow, okay. And the olives.
Finally, the olive tree. The olive tree is just a marvel of evolutionary resilience. It thrives in poor, rocky, arid soil where absolutely nothing else of value will grow. It can survive intense heat and drought, and you harvest the olives in the late autumn or early winter.
So by relying on this specific triad, a community ensures that they are pulling calories from the land almost year-round, despite the extreme weather. And they're utilizing different types of terrain, right? The flat plains for grain, the rocky slopes for the vines, and the harshest soil for the olives.
Precisely. And more importantly, the products of this triad, wheat, wine, and olive oil, can all be preserved for years and are highly transportable. This wasn't just subsistence, you know. This was the creation of a durable currency.
Which brings us to the transportation network. You have the mountains acting as massive walls, fracturing the land, but then you have the water.
Oh, the water.
The Mediterranean, the Adriatic, the Aegean, the Tyrrhenian, and the Ionian seas.
And the water changes everything. We are conditioned by terrestrial maps to think of a body of water as a barrier, you know, a giant moat separating one nation from another. But in Southern Europe, the sea is the exact opposite.
It was a high-speed highway.
Exactly.
It's like an ancient fiber optic network. I look at the logistics in these sources, and the math is staggering. Moving a ton of grain or olive oil by ship across the entire Mediterranean Sea was vastly cheaper, faster, and infinitely safer than trying to drag a wooden cart over a frozen pass in the Alps for 50 miles.
The economics of water transport completely defied the terrestrial borders, and this creates the core geographic tension of the entire region. The mountains created deep, stubborn fragmentation.
Right, preserving microcultures.
Yes, they preserved highly specific microcultures, local dialects, and insular village identities. But the sea drove rapid, aggressive, cosmopolitan connectivity. Coastal port cities became intensely connected nodes of information and trade.
That's fascinating.
It is. A port city in southern Italy might have vastly more in common culturally, economically, and genetically with a port city in Greece or North Africa than it did with a mountain village located just a 2-day walk inland.
So you have these hyper-connected coasts ringing a massively fractured mountainous interior. That is the physical hinge. Let's populate it. Let's look at the very first humans to navigate this terrain.
Yeah, let's go back.
The sources take us deep into prehistory, pointing to the arrival of Homo sapiens in southeastern Europe around 45,000 years ago.
We have to look at the archaeological evidence here, specifically the site at Bacho Kiro Cave in modern-day Bulgaria. This site is pivotal. We find bone pendants made from cave bear teeth, advanced stone tools, and the physical remains of early modern humans.
Right.
But the critical piece of data here is that these humans did not enter an empty continent. They entered a European theater that was heavily populated by Neanderthals.
And for a long time, the dominant historical narrative was one of pure conquest, wasn't it? The idea that Homo sapiens marched in, superior and violent, and simply wiped the Neanderthals off the map.
Right, that was the story. But the DNA evidence from sites like Baccio completely dismantles that.
How so?
It dismantles it because we now have proof of direct multi-generational genetic admixture. The early modern humans moving through the valleys and coastal routes of the Balkans didn't just compete with Neanderthals, they interbred with them. The genomes of the individuals found at Baccio show recent Neanderthal ancestors, sometimes just a few generations back.
Wow.
So the story of survival on the hinge starts with integration, not clean replacement.
And we see that exact same pattern repeat tens of thousands of years later after the Ice Age's end during the Neolithic transition. This is when farming begins.
The Neolithic transition is arguably the most significant shift in human history. We see early farming communities emerging in Anatolia and the Aegean Basin. Armed with the very beginnings of that agricultural triad we discussed, they start moving westward, they island hop across the Mediterranean, they move along the coastal plains of Italy and Iberia.
Now, I want to make sure I understand the mechanics of this migration, because again, it challenges the idea of invasion. These Anatolian farmers didn't just arrive as a massive unified army, conquer the indigenous hunter-gatherers, and declare the land theirs.
No, it was a deeply granular, protracted process. We are talking about small groups of farmers moving incrementally over centuries. And as they moved, the ancient DNA shows us they mixed heavily with the local European forager populations.
So they shared knowledge.
Exactly. They exchanged survival techniques. The foragers knew the forests, the deep mountain passes, and the local game. The farmers brought the sieves and the animal husbandry.
So for our listener thinking about their Val identity, this is a crucial takeaway. The earliest human foundation of Southern Europe absolutely destroys the modern myth of pure ethnic origins.
There is no pure original tribe.
Right. There's no original unmixed tribe that we can point to. From the very beginning, survival in this rugged terrain required genetic and cultural synthesis. They were scouts, probing a dangerous landscape, and they survived by combining forces.
It's a continuous sequence of arrivals, mixtures, regional survivals, and constant cultural transformations. By the time we move out of the Stone Age and into the Bronze Age, these mixed communities have figured out how to extract massive caloric surpluses from the land. And surplus calories lead directly to complex political power.
This is where the societies we read about in textbooks start to emerge. But true to the geography, Southern Europe didn't produce a single unified cradle of civilization like the Nile River Valley did for Egypt. The mountains prevented it.
That's right. Instead, it produced several interconnected, heavily fortified micro-civilizations.
Like who?
Well, in the Eastern Mediterranean, in the Aegean world, you see the rise of the Minoans on the island of Crete. They capitalized on the sea highway, building a remarkably complex palace-based maritime economy. They controlled trade routes stretching to Egypt and the Levant.
Okay, so they were the sea traders.
Yes. Following them, on the Greek mainland, you have the Mycenaeans. Because they were on the mainland, competing for tighter resources in fortified mountain valleys, they developed a much more rigid, aggressive, warrior elite culture.
And while the Aegean is doing that, the Western Mediterranean is running its own parallel experiments. In Iberia, you have proto-urban societies building massive defensive walls. In Sardinia, you have the Nuragic civilization. The sources highlight the Nuraghi, these incredible, imposing megalithic stone towers that still dot the Sardinian landscape today.
The Nuragic towers are a perfect physical manifestation of the environment. Sardinia is rugged. The communities there didn't build a single sprawling capital city because the terrain wouldn't support it. Instead, they built thousands of localized, highly defensible stone fortresses. It was a civilization built on local autonomy and armed vigilance.
It's a landscape of constant friction. Which brings us to the Iron Age, classical antiquity, and the rise of the Greek city-states. Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes. Because they are isolated by mountains but connected by the sea, they serve as the ultimate political laboratory.
They really do. In a very small geographic area, you see the simultaneous development of democracy, extreme military oligarchy, and tyranny.
They are fiercely independent. But then, the great anomaly occurs. The ultimate force of centralization arrives on the hinge. Rome.
Yes, Rome.
And I need to pause here and seriously push back on this point. I'm having a really hard time squaring the logic here.
Okay, what do you mean?
Well, we have just spent the last 20 minutes establishing that the fundamental geography of this entire region naturally fractures people. The mountains physically prevent large, unified states. The sea empowers independent port cities. If the terrain inherently creates isolated, fiercely independent microcultures, how did the Roman Republic and eventually the empire managed to turn this entire chaotic Mediterranean basin into a single, highly functioning political arena. Did they just have magic?
They didn't have magic, no. They had unprecedented organizational discipline and a willingness to completely override the natural environment through sheer engineering and legal force. I mean, Rome is the ultimate case study in synthesis under pressure.
How sad.
They didn't try to erase the geography, they strapped a harness onto it.
How exactly did they do that? What was the mechanism?
It was a two-pronged mechanism: physical infrastructure and administrative integration. Physically, Rome didn't rely on the treacherous mountain passes. They built the Via Romana, the massive network of paved Roman roads.
Ah, right. The roads.
They drove these roads straight through mountains, over massive arched bridges, and across swamps. A road like the Via Appia wasn't just a path. It was a physical manifestation of imperial will. It allowed Roman legions, tax collectors, and administrators to move at speeds the region had never seen. They built a system over the mountains.
Wow. So they forced the fiber optic network of the sea to connect to the inland valleys via paved stone.
Exactly. And administratively, Rome didn't generally massacre the local elites of the territories they conquered. Instead, they co-opted them. If a Roman legion marched into an Iberian valley, they would identify the local chieftain.
And what, just hire them?
Basically. They would offer that chieftain Roman citizenship, access to Roman trade networks, and the backing of Roman military power, so long as that chieftain collected the grain tax and maintained local order.
So they literally turned the local autonomous leaders into middle managers for the empire.
Precisely. They layered Roman codified law over local customs. But by forcing that connection, by overlaying a massive centralized empire on top of fundamentally isolated, fractured geography, Rome permanently embedded a massive political contradiction into the DNA of Southern Europe.
A contradiction that I see echoing constantly in the listener's Val persona.
Absolutely. It is the structural tension between the deep geographic desire for local village autonomy, constantly fighting against the imposition of central imperial authority. It is the ideals of the local republic conflicting with the realities of a vast empire.
It's codified, abstract Roman law clashing against local networks of patronage and personal power. Rome built the master template, but the underlying tension never went away.
Never.
And as we know, empires don't last forever. The heat in the foundry fluctuates. The X-ray machine breaks. So when the formal imposing structures of the Roman Empire finally collapse in the West during late antiquity, what actually happens to the people left behind in those isolated valleys?
That's the big question.
Right. When the legions stop patrolling the Via Appia and the tax collectors stop coming, what does the society do?
This is where we enter the era of collisions and accumulation. And to understand this era, we have to look at the massive influx of new populations. When the Roman state mechanism fails in the 5th century, it creates a massive power vacuum, and new groups flood into the hinge.
The history books usually call this the barbarian invasions, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the sources frame it more as massive migrations of Germanic and Slavic peoples seeking stability in arable land.
Exactly. In the West, the Visigoths cross the Pyrenees and establish a kingdom in Iberia. The Ostrogoths, and later the Lombards, push down into the Italian peninsula. And in the east, massive waves of Slavic migrations move into the Balkans, completely reshaping the demographic and cultural map, settling in the valleys and merging with the indigenous Romanized populations.
Now, I want to use an analogy here because the way this era is usually taught is deeply flawed. We are often taught history like it's an Etch-a-Sketch.
An Etch-a-Sketch.
You know, the Roman Empire falls, somebody shakes the board, the screen goes blank, and the Visigoths draw a brand new picture. Then the Muslims arrive, shake the board, and draw something else.
Oh, I see what you mean.
But reading your sources, I realized Southern Europe isn't an Etch-a-Sketch at all. It is a massive, ancient computer hard drive. It never actually deletes any of the old files. It just keeps writing new code directly on top of the old code.
That is a profoundly accurate way to view the hinge. Southern Europe does not replace, it accumulates. It is a process of relentless layering. When the Visigoths took over Iberia, they didn't burn down the Roman cities and build wooden huts.
They moved into the Roman villas, didn't they?
Yes, they moved into the villas, they adopted Roman administrative districts, they learned a vulgarized form of Latin, they layered their Germanic warrior aristocracy directly on top of the existing Hispano-Roman bureaucratic foundation.
You can literally see this physical layering if you walk down a street in a modern Southern European city today.
You absolutely can. I mean, the subterranean foundation of the street might be a paved Roman road. The buildings lining it might follow a medieval town plan.
And the church.
Right. The central church might be a Baroque structure from the 1700s, but it's built directly on the foundations of a 6th century Visigothic chapel, which was built on top of a 1st century Roman temple, which was originally the site of a pre-Roman indigenous shrine.
That is mind-blowing.
And the people walking on the street are participating in modern 21st century democratic politics while speaking a language derived from Latin. All of it exists simultaneously. The hard drive is full, but it's all functioning.
And there is no greater, more complex example of this accumulation in the sources than what happens in the 8th century in Iberia.
The arrival of Islamic forces in 711 AD, the creation of Al-Andalus. This is the absolute game changer for the Western Mediterranean.
I want us to spend time here because global pop culture and political rhetoric constantly try to flatten Al-Andalus into one of two ridiculous extremes.
Oh, definitely.
Some people want to portray it as a perfect, peaceful, enlightened utopia of interfaith harmony where everyone held hands. Others want to portray it as a brutal, blood-soaked monolith of unrelenting religious oppression and forced conversion. And we need to report on this objectively based on our sources.
And the reality of the hinge, according to the sources, is that it was neither of those simplistic extremes. It was a living, breathing synthesis under immense pressure. It was a deeply complex, constantly fluctuating borderland.
Let's break down the mechanics of how Al-Andalus actually functioned. When the Umayyad forces arrived, how did they alter the hard drive?
Well, first, they brought massive agricultural and technological innovations from the east. They introduced the acequia system, highly advanced networks of irrigation canals based on Syrian and Persian models. They took the dry, arid plateau of Iberia and turned it into incredibly productive agricultural land.
What kind of crops did they bring?
Things like citrus, rice, cotton, and hard durum wheat.
So they fundamentally upgraded the local caloric engine.
Yes, completely. And culturally, cities like Cordoba became the intellectual centers of the known world. You had a massive translation movement where ancient Greek philosophical and scientific texts were translated into Arabic, studied, expanded upon, and eventually translated into Latin, which actually fueled the later European Renaissance.
But it wasn't a modern egalitarian society.
No, and we must be clear about the social mechanics outlined in the material. The society was governed by Islamic law, which instituted the dhimmi system. Christians and Jews were considered people of the book. They were legally protected, allowed to practice their religions and govern their internal community affairs, but they were legally subordinate.
Subordinate how?
They paid a specific tax, the jizya, and faced various social and political restrictions. It was a system of managed coexistence, not modern equality.
And it was a borderland. I mean, the northern fringes of the peninsula remained under Christian control, leading to centuries of shifting borders, temporary alliances, and brutal warfare, the prolonged period known as the Reconquista.
Right. It was a zone of intense interaction between Arabs, Berbers, indigenous Iberians, Jews, and Christians. There was profound cooperation, intermarriage, and intellectual exchange. But there was also intense rivalry, political betrayal, and mass violence.
Kings of varying faiths frequently allied with one another against their co-religionists when it suited their strategic goals, right?
All the time. That is what we mean by disciplined chaos. You survive in that environment by being relentlessly pragmatic, not ideologically pure.
And we see this pragmatic accumulation everywhere on the hinge. Moving into the High Middle Ages, let's look at the Italian peninsula. Because of the Apennine Mountains, Italy doesn't immediately form a single unified kingdom. Instead, you get the rise of the maritime republics: Venice, Genoa, Pisa, Amalfi.
Venice is the ultimate example of exploiting the sea highway. Built in a defensible lagoon, protected from terrestrial warlords, Venice doesn't build a massive land empire.
What do they build?
It builds a commercial maritime empire. They master naval architecture, creating the Venetian arsenal, an early proto-industrial complex capable of mass-producing war galleys. They perfectly fuse ruthless global commerce with lethal military force, controlling trade from the Levant all the way up to northern Europe.
Meanwhile, in the eastern half of the hinge, in the Balkans, you have a completely different massive collision occurring. The Ottoman Empire begins its rapid expansion into southeastern Europe in the 14th and 15th centuries.
The Ottomans are fascinating because, much like the Romans, they are master administrators. They aggressively layer Islamic religion and a highly structured Turkish imperial administration directly on top of the deep pre-existing foundations of Slavic, Greek, and Orthodox Christian cultures.
How did they manage that administratively? Because the Balkans are arguably the most mountainous, fragmented terrain in the entire region.
They utilized the millet system. The Ottoman state organized its non-Muslim subjects into legally protected religious communities, or millets. The Orthodox Christian community was allowed to govern its own laws, education, and social affairs under the authority of its own religious patriarch, so long as they remained loyal and paid their taxes to the Sultan.
Wow. It was, again, a mechanism of imperial control that preserved, rather than erased, local identities.
Precisely.
So layer upon layer upon layer, Romans, Germanic tribes, Byzantines, Arabs, Berbers, Venetians, Ottomans. The hard drive is incredibly dense. But as we move toward modernity into the 19th and 20th centuries, a new software program is introduced that tries to reformat the whole drive. Nationalism.
Nationalism. This is the ideology that a specific ethnic and linguistic group should have its own sovereign state. In Southern Europe, this was an incredibly violent and disruptive concept.
Why was it so disruptive?
Because nationalism tried to take all these deeply ancient, intertwined layers of religious, linguistic, and regional differences and forcefully condense them into neat, tightly bordered nation-states. It led to the unifications of Italy and Germany, the bloody dismantling of the Ottoman and Austro-Hungarian empires, and immense conflict throughout the Balkans and Iberia.
But the crucial takeaway from the sources is that despite the creation of modern nation-states, the hard drive wasn't wiped. The older layers beneath never actually disappeared.
Never. And to connect this directly back to you, the listener, and your vow mindset, this era of collisions proves a fundamental psychological truth about the region.
Which is?
Identity here is highly fluid, capable of absorbing new empires and religions, but historical memory is rigidly, stubbornly strong. A peasant living in medieval Sicily or the Dalmatian coast would have understood exactly who they were through the lens of their specific valley, their local saint, and their immediate family network long, long before they ever conceived of themselves as belonging to a nation.
Which brings me to a massive logistical question. If you have a society that has been repeatedly conquered, where the political borders on the map are redrawn every few generations through war, and where the central government could be a Roman emperor one century, a Visigothic king the next, an Islamic caliph after that, and finally a Catholic monarch.
That's a lot of turnover.
Yeah, exactly. How do the actual everyday people survive? I mean, how does a society functionally operate when the top layer of power is in a constant state of flux?
This is perhaps the most important concept in the entire deep dive. This brings us to what the sources identify as the twin engines of Southern European society. To survive in an environment of constant political upheaval, the region developed two distinct parallel tracks of operation.
Two operating systems running at the same time.
Exactly. First, we have System A. This is the formal system.
System A is the state, right? It's the written constitution, the penal code, the official government bureaucracy, the tax collectors, the police force, and the organized official hierarchy of the dominant religion.
Right. It is everything that looks impressive and orderly on paper.
Okay, and System B?
Running simultaneously beneath that and historically acting with much greater immediate power is System B, the informal system.
System B.
Yeah.
Let's define this clearly. System B is family. It is extended kinship networks. It is personal reputation, honor, local patronage networks, deeply ingrained village norms, and interpersonal debts of gratitude.
And the sources are explicitly clear on this dynamic. In practice, on the ground, System B often completely overrides and bypasses System A.
I want to stop and unpack this because this specific dynamic is the source of a massive global cultural misunderstanding.
Oh, completely.
An outsider, say a political analyst from Northern Europe and North America, where System A is generally trusted and revered, looks at Southern Europe. They look at the intense reliance on who you know to get a job done. They look at the cultural focus on fierce family loyalty over strict, rigid adherence to abstract municipal law.
And the historical evasion of central taxation.
Yeah. And the outsider just throws up their hands and calls it corruption. They label it systemic dysfunction, nepotism, or backwardness.
This requires a total paradigm shift. We have to reframe this completely. System B is not dysfunction. It is a highly rational, hyper-adapted survival strategy.
Walk me through the logic of that survival strategy.
Think about the historical context we just spent 30 minutes outlining. If you live in a historically volatile environment where the empire ruling you today might collapse tomorrow, or where the central government views your valley merely as an extraction zone for taxes and conscripts, then central authority is, by definition, an unreliable and often hostile force.
Right. You cannot put your faith in the Roman magistrate to protect your property if the Roman Empire is currently falling to pieces.
Exactly.
You cannot rely on the state's abstract social safety net if the state might literally not exist in 10 years.
Yes, abstract law cannot feed your children during a famine. A written constitution cannot protect your farm from a raiding party. So what do you rely on? What is the only durable asset you possess?
Your kin?
You rely on your kin. You rely on your network. The intense, almost sacred value placed on family honor, on personal dignity, on visibility and reputation in Southern Europe. This isn't just an emotional quirk of a passionate culture. It is a calculated, strategic, defensive shield.
It's an insurance policy.
It is the ultimate insurance policy. When the formal structures of System A inevitably collapse under the weight of history, your name, your honor, and the informal network of favors you have cultivated in System B are your true, enduring social security.
So if your house burns down, the state might take 5 years to process the paperwork.
Right, but your uncle and your cousin, who you helped during the harvest last year, will be there tomorrow with lumber.
That makes profound sense. And when you understand System B, the physical layout of Southern European towns suddenly becomes perfectly logical.
Oh, the architecture reflects it completely.
It explains the immense, overwhelming cultural value placed on public sociability. The town square, the Italian piazza, the Spanish plaza, the Greek platea, the open market, the bustling port, the cafe culture, the massive Sunday feast table.
Because if your survival fundamentally depends on your reputation and your network, you must be visible. You cannot afford to hide in your house. The public square is the physical architecture of System B.
That's where you go to be seen.
Exactly. It is where you go to exchange information, to arrange marriages, to display your family's dignity, and to negotiate the informal contracts that keep your community alive. It is where System B is maintained and strengthened.
It's the boardroom of survival.
I like that. The boardroom of survival.
But this raises a new question. This intense reliance on local, informal systems requires continuity. When empires fall, when libraries burn, and when the formal schools of System A are closed, how do you pass down the rules of System B? Like, how do you teach the next generation who they are and who they can trust?
You don't rely on books. You rely on daily rituals. You use the tools of your culture.
Which brings us to a fascinating segment of our deep dive. Culture is the ultimate mechanism of survival and memory. This section of the sources gave me a massive aha moment. In standard historical analysis, we often treat food, music, and art as the soft subjects, the entertaining side topics.
Right, like they're just hobbies.
Yeah, we spend chapters talking about the wars, the generals, and the treaties, and then we add a little sidebar at the end saying, oh, and they also ate olives and played the guitar. But reading these sources, I realized that a plate of food in Southern Europe is actually a high-density historical document.
It is a living archive.
Exactly. You look at a traditional dish from a specific village, and you are literally consuming geography, ancient maritime trade routes, agricultural ingenuity, and centuries of encoded family rituals on a single plate.
Let's use the most famous example, the Mediterranean diet. It is globally renowned, mostly for its health benefits, but it is deeply misunderstood by the health and wellness industry. When UNESCO officially recognized the Mediterranean diet as an intangible cultural heritage of humanity, they didn't just recognize it as a healthy list of ingredients you can buy at a supermarket.
They didn't just say, eat more fish and less butter.
No, not at all. They explicitly defined the diet as a comprehensive set of skills, knowledge, rituals, symbols, and traditions. It encompasses the communal knowledge of the crop cycles, the specific techniques of harvesting, fishing, and animal husbandry.
It's the methods of conservation, too.
Right. Curing meats, salting fish, fermenting grapes, and most importantly, it is the ritualized sharing and consumption of food.
It is the physical manifestation of the System B feast table we just talked about.
Furthermore, Southern Europe uses its food to turn historical movement into tangible value. Remember, the sea is a high-speed highway?
Of course.
The ingredients that make up the most iconic dishes of the region, the tomatoes from the Americas, the specific spices from the Levant, the citrus and rice brought by the Arabs to Iberia, the techniques for preserving cod brought from the North Atlantic. These weren't just randomly tossed together.
They were synthesized.
Yes, they were meticulously layered and synthesized into incredibly specific, micro-regional recipes.
And agricultural choices reflect deep systemic survival. Earlier, we talked about the olive tree. I learned recently that an olive tree can take anywhere from 5 to 12 years to produce its first viable crop.
That is a crucial biological fact with massive historical implications.
Right. Because if you are a farmer in a valley and you choose to plant a grove of olive trees, you are making a profound statement of faith in the future. You are investing a decade of labor into something that won't feed you tomorrow. It will feed your children.
And that requires stability.
Yes, that requires a stable System B network to protect that grove while it matures. The olive tree isn't just a crop, it's a multi-generational pact.
And we see that exact same mechanism of synthesis and memory in the region's music. The music here is a literal, audible manifestation of border contact, of the hinge's endless collisions.
Let's talk about the specific musical traditions the sources highlight. You have a grand, emotional, highly structured synthesis of opera originating in Italy. You have flamenco in the Andalusia region of Spain.
Flamenco is fascinating.
It is. It's an incredibly visceral art form that carries the undeniable synthesized echoes of Moorish musical scales, Jewish lamentations, indigenous Andalusian folk songs, and the rhythmic complexities brought by the Romani people.
And then you have fado in Portugal. Fado is a perfect, crystalline example of culture functioning as a historical archive. The word itself comes from the Latin fatum, meaning fate or destiny.
What's the story behind fado?
UNESCO describes fado as a distinctly multicultural synthesis. It did not originate in the isolated mountain villages. It grew directly out of the bustling, chaotic, cosmopolitan port areas of Lisbon in the 19th century.
The sea highway again?
Yes. Fado absorbed the massive maritime history of the Portuguese Empire. It absorbed the rhythms of the diverse populations coming off the ships from Brazil and Africa. It absorbed the profound yearning, the loss, and the danger associated with sending your men out onto the open ocean.
Why? So it's a documentation of loss.
Yes, it is the history of the Portuguese collision zone, expressed through voice and the Portuguese guitar, focused around this unique cultural concept of saudade, a deep, melancholic longing for something or someone that is absent.
So when a grandmother in a Southern European village fiercely, almost angrily defends the exact proper traditional way to make a local dish, or when a community strictly polices the execution of a local musical festival, they aren't just being stubborn.
Not at all.
They aren't just being quaint or stuck in the past.
They are aggressively defending their identity anchors because these cultural traditions, the recipe, the song, the harvest festival, serve as vital memory systems. They are the actual tangible glue that holds System B together.
So when System A collapses.
Exactly. When the formal state fails, the shared ritual of the feast table and the shared memory of the song are what bind the community together, reminding them of who they are, who belongs, and how they survive.
But there is a massive irony here. Because these cultural exports, the amazing food, the visceral music, the stunning architecture, the beautiful coastlines, are so incredibly powerful and appealing, they have been exported globally. Everyone in the world knows some version of Southern Europe.
Some version, yeah.
But in that mass global export, the actual, complex, gritty truth of the foundry has been depthly, sometimes comically distorted. Which brings us to the tension between pop culture myths versus the reality of the hinge.
The unfortunate reality is that global pop culture has essentially turned Southern Europe into a convenient prepackaged costume set.
It really has. You watch a Hollywood movie or read a popular beach novel or watch a travel commercial, and it's always the exact same shorthand tropes. It's the ancient wisdom of the bearded philosopher standing in a clean white toga.
Always the toga.
Yeah. It's the passion and the hot-blooded, volatile temperament of the locals. It's the hyper-stylized, romanticized mafia tropes. It's the lazy, sun-drenched vacation coasts where time stands still. It's the stereotype of the traditional, loud, chaotic family gathered around a massive bowl of pasta, shouting at each other.
The sources outline 4 major, deeply ingrained misunderstandings that this pop culture flattening creates. And it's vital for our listener, applying their Val mindset to deconstruct these myths. The first myth is the idea that Southern Europe is culturally uniform.
Which we have thoroughly established is physically and geologically impossible.
Exactly.
The mountains and the fragmented coastlines completely prevent uniformity. A Sicilian is fundamentally not a Venetian. An Andalusian in southern Spain is culturally distinct from a Basque in the northern Pyrenees.
The second massive misunderstanding is that Southern Europe is solely the birthplace of the West.
Right, the Eurocentric idea that Greece and Rome form this pure, hermetically sealed incubator of modern Western civilization, completely separate from the rest of the world.
It completely ignores the geographic reality that the Mediterranean is, and always has been, a shared sea. Southern Europe was profoundly, fundamentally shaped by continuous contact, intellectual exchange, conflict, and genetic intermingling with North African, Levantine, Islamic, and Slavic influences. It is a hinge connecting continents, not a sealed European vault.
The third myth is that tradition in this region equates to stagnation. The idea that these are beautiful, sleepy countries just living in their past, acting as open-air museums for tourists.
Which is disproven by the very nature of their survival mechanics. As we saw with the food and the music, tradition here is not a fossil encased in amber. It is constantly being remixed, adapted, and synthesized with new inputs. To survive in the foundry, you cannot be stagnant.
And the fourth myth, which I find to be the most frustrating and fascinating, is the stereotype that the region is driven entirely by emotion, passion, and family drama. The idea that it lacks systems, logic, or discipline. I have to ask you, why do you think global pop culture so heavily prefers the hot-blooded, passionate, slightly chaotic stereotype over the absolute historical reality of the brilliant, world-changing legal and administrative systems they actually invented? I mean, we are talking about Rome, a society that gave us the bedrock legal framework and municipal plumbing for half the planet.
I think pop culture prefers the stereotype because pop culture is fundamentally designed for easy, frictionless consumption. It flattens living, complex, historically dense regions into easily digestible shorthand.
It's easier to sell a romance.
Precisely. It is much easier and much more commercially viable to write a movie script about a passionate, hot-blooded romance playing out on a beautiful Amalfi Coast than it is to dramatize the intricate, highly disciplined brilliance of Roman legal codification or the staggeringly complex municipal maritime administration of the Venetian Republic. Emotion is easy to sell, but structural discipline is hard to explain.
Disciplined is the key word there.
Yeah.
Pop culture completely misses the underlying discipline required to survive the chaos.
Entirely. If we must distill the central global impact of Southern Europe into a single concept, it is precisely this. Southern Europe taught the rest of the world how to connect raw political power, high cultural aesthetics, and the gritty realities of everyday life.
Synthesis under pressure.
Yes. Its greatest historical gift to humanity isn't just marble statues, it is synthesis under pressure. They didn't just fight pointless wars over barren rocks, they took the immense crushing pressure of constant collisions between competing empires, differing religions, and hostile geographies, and they turned those collisions into enduring institutions, profound philosophies, and powerful myths.
Which brings us perfectly to the absolute core reason you, our listener, requested this specific deep dive. We have laid the massive groundwork. We have climbed the mountain from the Paleolithic caves to the modern piazzas, and now we arrive at the summit, the Val lens and the ultimate takeaway.
We need to connect these 40,000 years of deep history directly to your Val subpersonality.
In the reflections you uploaded, you described Val as a relentless climber and reformer. You described a mindset that profoundly respects its roots, a mindset that demands extreme discipline, but crucially, a mindset that is willing to ruthlessly break what needs to be broken in order to survive and achieve excellence.
And looking at these sources, the historical cycle of Southern Europe is a perfect, massive mirror for that internal psychological state.
How so?
The macro-historical cycle of the region is clear, repetitive, and undeniable. Fragmentation caused by the geography, followed by unification forced by external pressure or empire, followed inevitably by collapse when the pressure becomes unsustainable, and then finally, reformation into something entirely new but built on the old foundations. Repeat that cycle for millennia.
Let me speak directly to you for a moment. The sources we've analyzed today scream that Southern Europe fits your Val persona perfectly. This region is not a place of quiet, museum-like stability. It is the historical definition of disciplined chaos.
In this framework, the mountains represent the intense pressure, the constraints, and the immense friction you face in your climb.
And the sea represents the constant chaotic opportunity for rapid connection, new inputs, and expansion. The various empires, Rome, Al-Andalus, the Ottomans, are the formal structures and systems you build or are forced to navigate, and the inevitable collapse of those empires. That's not the end of the story.
No, it's not a failure. It is just a testing ground to see what endures.
Exactly.
If we connect all of this to the bigger picture of your personal development, the ultimate survival lesson of Southern Europe, the lesson of the hinge, is profoundly applicable to the relentless climber.
What's the main lesson?
The history here proves definitively that you do not survive in a chaotic, high-pressure environment by being rigid. If you are rigid, like the glass case in a museum, you will inevitably shatter when the external pressure changes.
Makes sense.
But equally, you do not survive by being rootless, by acting like an Etch-a-Sketch and completely discarding everything you are every time you face a new challenge.
So if you can't be rigid and you can't be rootless, how do you actually survive the foundry?
You survive by knowing exactly who you are, deeply and historically. You survive by adjusting your stance to the pressure rather than breaking yourself against it. And most importantly, you survive by using the terrain. You use the mountains, your boundaries, your discipline, your System B networks to fiercely protect what is vital.
And you use the sea.
Yes, you use the C, your adaptability, your willingness to synthesize new ideas, to find what you need to grow. As Val, you don't erase your past. You refine it. You meticulously carry forward the traditions, the disciplines, and the core identity that works. And you ruthlessly discard the obsolete, formal structures that weaken you.
You keep the craft. You keep the feast table. You keep the deep memory of the hard drive. But you break what crushes the living. That is the essence of the Val mindset, and it is the absolute, unvarnished, historical essence of Southern Europe.
It is the ultimate manifestation of synthesis under pressure.
What an incredible, sweeping journey. We want to thank you so much for bringing us this phenomenal stack of sources and for giving us the opportunity to view such a massive, complex span of human history through such a deeply personal and powerful psychological lens.
It has been a genuinely fascinating exploration of how external geography and history can so perfectly reflect internal mindset and personal strategy.
Before we sign off, we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Something to take with you on your own continuous climb. We've talked for the last hour about how Southern Europe fundamentally proves that human beings are rarely just one simple, isolated thing, and that true, enduring civilizations do not stay pure. They grow and gain their strength specifically through collision and accumulation.
So true.
So think about your own identity right now. Think deeply about your Val mindset. What if the specific traits you currently consider to be your absolute, unchanging core identity are actually just the successful results of two deeply conflicting ideas that collided in your past? What if your current strength, your current discipline, is just your own personal synthesis under pressure? You aren't a clean, quiet museum exhibit. You are the active foundry. Keep synthesizing, keep climbing, and keep exploring.